Back in 2020 in my sniping vid, I showed how you could ripple two Vikhrs within generally 6-second gap. Setting your burst length to medium or long and holding down the trigger fires two Vikhrs, but the problem is they're released in such rapid succession that will both hit the same target. Which is okay if you want to hit a bunker or make sure that tank is dead for reals. This is often wasteful, so for Vikhrs I recommend staying in short burst length, so if you accidentally hold down the trigger slightly longer, you don't lob off two. Now in automatic mode, once you release the trigger, it won't respond anymore while the Vikhrs are in flight. You have to wait for the guidance laser to stop firing, which is shown on the HUD here. If you're in manual mode, you can also hold the trigger in medium or long burst to have it ripple off two Vikhrs at the same target. However, if you just tap the trigger, or more reliably you're in short burst length, like your helo starts up in, then you can pull the trigger, wait a few seconds and squeeze the trigger again to launch a second Vikhr. And if you space this right, it gives you time so after the first missile hits, you can slew over to the second target. You just need to do it slowly and smoothly enough that the Vikhr doesn't lose the beam and has time to align for the second hit. So fire, wait for the impact, slew to the second target, wait for the second impact. Remember, you don't need a contrast lock nor a laser ranging for every target. You just need a ranging so the laser knows roughly how long it needs to guide the missiles for. If that laser stops firing too soon, the missiles lose guidance. And since it fires the laser for an extra 6 seconds, that's maybe another 1.5 kilometer buffer you have. So if in doubt, just laze nearby the furthest target. That way you know it's got you covered. Remember, if you move the Schwal while it's laser ranging, it'll update that number. And after the ranging stops firing, slewing around the ground, it will guess a new ranging based on the angular change, which is normally fine and it's normally accurate enough. That guessing of the ranging only really becomes a problem with lofting unguided munitions. Now the best angle for rippling? There's a bunch of factors. Ideally the targets are close enough that you don't have to be pixel perfect slewing to hit. But there's some margin for error in your aim and the missile itself. Now the two targets are ideally close enough that you can slew over smoothly and slowly for your given gap. If you're not super pro with pacing, using that slewing at as an axis at a slow pace, then the easiest way to ensure it moves slowly is simply by being a narrow, zoomed in field of view. This way the slew hat is capped how fast it can move and you have a good chance the missile keeps track of the beam. Now here's a tank column. Line abreast, I need to slew for days to the next target. If I attack from the side, they're more readily lined up, and even though they're still the same distance from one another, my tracking gate and the Vikhrs don't have to change angle much. The Vikhrs aren't tracking 3D space as much as a spot on your 2D screen, if that makes sense. So it matters less about how far your targets are from one another than it does how far you have to slew your scope to get onto the second target. Since the second missile has up till that point been heading towards the first target as well, you're giving it a course shift mid-flight. And the more drastic that course shift, and the more rapidly it has to do it, the less accurate it'll be. So having the targets close to the tracking gate of the initial target and one another makes it easier. But you also don't want a blob of targets where you can't distinguish your target from missile impacts. Best if you can still see clearly the individual targets and confirm the individual impacts. Of course, if you see that one of your missiles has missed or had no effect, you don't even have to slew onto the second target if you don't want. You just keep the crosshairs right there and have the second missile right in on the same target that didn't die. Now, to change how the targets are lined up, of course you need to orbit around or gain some altitude. Whether or not that's possible, given the threat and the urgency that you need to take them out in, depends on the situation. The gap between your shots is up to you. If the targets are really close together and maybe softly armored like these BTRs, you might even get away with a 1 second gap and near misses. But this puts loads of pressure on you, needing to react really quickly to that first explosion and acquiring the second target in a fraction of a second and hoping the missile could stabilize on the new target. Especially for tanks, you need to ensure those direct hits. I recommend a gap of no less than 3 to 4 seconds between firing each missile and thus each impact. In a zoomed in view with your tracking gate on the current or first target, if the follow-up target is about the distance away of these first wings level bars, make the gap to firing a second missile 4 seconds. If it's further than that, up till these outer artificial horizon bars, make it 6 seconds. At the edge of the screen, give 10 seconds or more. If the targets are hard to aim on, from being 8Ks out or being hull down and obstructed by obstacles, build in more time as necessary. You don't want to unnecessarily just lose missiles from last minute adjustments and then. For ripple fire, you want to be mostly hands off for flying, so trimmed out well. Maybe using auto turn and or route mode or hover mode if you like, as needed. Just your attention is going to be on the screen and watching for that first impact. So you can't do this if you need to focus on avoiding obstacles and wingmen or watching for other threats out the cockpit. Depending on the lighting and how light or dark the targets are compared to the terrain, you might get a better picture if you drop the brightness slightly and maybe increase the contrast. Just whatever tweaks you need on these knobs to get the best picture of the targets, which really pays out when you're rippling. Now, Vikhrs might have an easier time recovering from losing the beam up close. Maybe that's because they still have energy or the proximity to the laser cone. And while Vikhrs are accurate, they can still miss regardless, even if you do give it enough time to settle. Also because DCS, I guess, some missiles seem to impact dead center but cause 0 damage, even with only the contact fuse. I suspect the Vikhrs might be a little more accurate if you lock the target rather than just having the tracking gate perfectly centered. But this is just theory, and it shouldn't matter at all with a target that's just static on your screen. If you did lock the first target, then just hold your slew hat in the direction of the follow-up target, and as soon as you see the explosion, while holding the slewing hat, tap lock again so it unlocks, moves in that direction, slew over, lock the secondary target if you want. If you only built in a small gap between the impacts, then this locking and unlocking, of course, adds to the number of steps you need to do in a small amount of time and the pressure in the critical moment. Any ripple fire, of course, is rushing the whole process and can degrade the accuracy of your hits. So if you have all the time in the world, fire single, fully prepared missiles. Ripple if you want, or need to take out multiple targets ASAP, such as if they're about to become threats to yourself or other friendly forces, or they're about to enter cover and this is the only shot you have. If you're in a perfect hover, with no wind, the smoke trails may still be blinding you, especially if the target's up close. This is a general issue, not just rippling, but obviously it gets worse if the follow-up missile launches later by the time the first missile is about to impact. So sometimes it helps if you have a small amount of side slip, climb or descent to see past those smoke trails if they start obscuring you. Now the order of your targets matters. If there's a threat in there like a Strela, maybe prioritize that. If one of the targets is about to be obscured and lost, maybe prioritize that. There's the usual adage of taking out the first and last in a convoy to box them in and maybe cause confusion, but I'm not sure that fully applies with the DCS AI. The default dispersion happens instantaneously, even if they're set to average skill, and it's mostly just how long they're set to chill in that new spot before resuming their route again if they have one. If there isn't a more important priority for targets, take them out so the explosions and smoke of the initial target doesn't blind you from follow-on targets. So generally this means taking out the target furthest away from you, or otherwise the downwind targets first, so the smoke column doesn't obscure the rest. Sometimes taking out the target in the front makes the rest just drive so close to that smoke, again blinding you, so maybe you need to go for the rear ones first. Either way, you'll need to assess the order on a case-by-case basis. Now, it's not often a consideration, but remember, if you slew in a direction, the missiles in flight will swing out a bit further than where you stopped, and might slew into an obstacle like a small ridge or a nearby building if your aiming corridor is really tight. So of course don't make risky shots with civilians or friendlies nearby. And at this point I was left with the question, is that it? Ripple 2 and no more? And I was about to make a vid saying, hey, sometimes I do a lot of testing and conjecture and well, come up empty-handed. But you know, this is the effort going into some of these videos pushing the boundaries. I tried the various weapon system and control modes, target points, everything behind the cyclic. The shock just didn't allow firing any more Vikhrs. At least not until you killed the laser and everything in the flight lost guidance. And then I discovered some voodoo. The ripple reset. See, if you press reset, it stops firing the ranging or Vikhr guidance laser. Normally, a bad idea, since it'll kill guidance for the existing missiles in flight. But then I discovered if you fire another missile immediately after you press reset, then the existing missiles aren't affected. So you can launch a Vikhr or two with the normal manual mode ripple. Then if you press laser reset and immediately thereafter pull the trigger on another missile, the existing missiles don't lose guidance. Every time you press reset, it's allowing you to fire another 2 missiles, assuming you're in manual mode. So fire, wait, press reset and immediately fire, wait, reset and fire, and so forth. You could even reset before every missile launch if you wanted. Sounds easy. I mean, where's the voodoo? If you wondered how much spaghetti code is behind DCS really, well, here you go. It doesn't work if you do it in the direction of due east or west plus minus 37 degrees. Wait, folk, that makes no sense. Exactly. Usually if you wait too long to fire another missile, after pressing reset, the missiles in flight kind of drift off, they've lost guidance. But if you fire in these directions, your missiles in flight wig out completely, regardless of how quickly you pull the trigger again after the reset. And yes, I tested distance, having a slight climb or movement speed, side slip, auto hover, static and moving targets, locks or just slewed guidance, ranging away from the targets and then slewing onto them, different maps, altitude, loadouts, target points on or off, wind, being co-altitude, if the terrain ahead is broken or flat, black and white symbology, sun position. The more I eliminated, the weirder stuff I tested. So it's a heading thing. And yes, you can fire a slightly off heading, but that's only going to matter in some really fringe cases. Now this is me firing due east. I just press reset immediately after the first missile. These were tests. Yes, you can reset after every missile and instead of every second missile. The first missile went nuts, but recovered and still ended up hitting both targets. So it's possible, but really reduces the odds of your Vikhrs hitting home. So don't do it east or west, really. If this isn't clear, this weird heading limit only applies if you're using the ripple reset hack. If you're using just the normal firing 2 Vikhrs without pressing the reset button, it's not an issue. Now my second issue with this ripple reset is that the Vikhr is a beam rider. The whole purpose, outside of cost, is stealth, and that the laser cone grows in intensity and range as the missile travels, riding the tip of the laser as it were. So the laser isn't supposed to be full strength all the way to the target and giving guidance to every missile in flight ahead of the one you just fired. I did some stealth tests back in the day with another player, and even if you don't laser range them, as soon as you launch a Vikhr at them, their laser warning goes off. So I think in DCS, the beam is at full strength all the way to the target, right from launch, right from the start. Now could the Vikhr and the guidance laser do anything like this in real life? I don't know. See, it's designed to fling off 2 in very rapid succession, so after the missiles settle from their wide spirals, the smoke and missile body of the second one should block the first missile. But the beam must be wide enough and lenient enough to ensure that both still accurately hit the target. So maybe there's room in the guidance cone for 1 or 2 more missiles, don't know. I'd expect the laser reset itself though would make the system forget about the previous missiles and grow the beam from scratch with the new launches, so that part might be a stretch. I guess it might not be magical for your laser's heat either. Now all that said, stuff changes often. There hasn't been anything in the open beta patch notes for the Ka-50 for a while, at least not anything guidance related, yet the laser at the moment can range for 30 k's out. Good eye-melting stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if this method also changed or gets removed without any shark-specific patches. Now this ripple reset hack, you can push it pretty far. Once I discovered this, I just had to try and push it to the extremes, and I made the trailer taking out the tank company in 26 seconds. Had to be a Soviet one, as most other tank companies had more tanks than I had missiles for. And is it realistic to take out a tank company in 26 seconds? Hells no. Is it doable in DCS in under 20? Probably. It took a lot of takes though. Even if I didn't make mistakes, some missiles seemed to hit and inflict no damage. Most shots had barely over a second of a gap, which means you're cluttering your targeting and timing the launch and reset of the next pair of missiles while timing gaps. It's a lot. It needed almost a perfect lineup and weather and the closer distance, so the missiles had good energy and targeting was easy on the bigger targets. Ideally the tanks would also have had some form of confusion and delay before they start scattering, and perhaps some intelligence in seeking cover. But that would take some super scripting instead of the normal dispersion and then sitting in the open a few meters away like they normally do, or the simple weaving like I had them do with dispersion set to 1 second before rejoining. Either way, that's an extreme. I'll see how often I'll use ripple reset itself over the usual rippling without the reset. If I use it, it'll likely be using the more accurate gaps of 4, 6 and 10 seconds I mentioned earlier. And maybe no more than 3 missiles in the air at once. I have no idea if they'll patch this away someday, by intent or inadvertently, but until they do, enjoy it. Have fun being that guy and hogging all the kills before everyone else gets a shot in. This is Volk. Cheers.